A very warm welcome to all our viewers and welcome to a new edition of Africa Today. Our program bringing you all the latest news and events happening all across the African continent. My name is Angie Meher and I'll be joining you for today's episode. And as usual, we begin straight away with a look at the news making the headlines. And starting from home, the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, said boosting trade and economic cooperation with Arab and African partners is a priority for the Egyptian government, especially at a time when the whole world is facing health, economic as well as social challenges posed by the repercussions of the coronavirus pandemic. Madbouli was speaking during a meeting with the members of the Governing Council of the African Arab Trade Bridges Program. Madbouli said Egypt will continue to boost efforts to achieve sustainable development in the African continent. He also said he appreciates cooperation with the International Islamic Institution for Trade Finances. Madbouli said Egypt plans to intensify cooperation with the institution in light of its programs in order to boost trade and investment flows between Arab and African countries. And we're now delighted to be joined over the telephone by our guest for this afternoon, Her Excellency Ambassador Souaid Chalabi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. A very good afternoon to you, Madam Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for joining us. And how would you describe the importance of the Arab-African trade ties for both Arab countries as well as African countries?
Actually, it is one of the priorities of Egypt and the priorities of the African continent.
Yes, indeed.
Because they established the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement a few years ago. And this presents opportunities to boost the intra-African trade between African countries and all the world, and especially the Arab countries who are able to finance and invest in Africa more than any other region in the world.
Yes.
So it's the relationship between Arab and African countries is very strong because they have the council that strengthen the complementarities between both. It boosts the exports, and it creates employment, and it actually also encourages the investments and encourages the businessmen in the Council of Businessmen between the Gulf countries, for instance, and the African countries under the umbrella of the African Free Trade Agreement.
Yes, indeed. Madam Ambassador, now Egypt is very unique geographically positioned in such a unique manner that it is a link really for many of Arab and African nations. How do you see the role that Egypt can play in boosting ties between the African side of the globe and the Arab world?
As you said, rightly mentioned, you mentioned the geographical location of Egypt, and the Suez Canal, of course, can help a lot to for the trade that is going from Africa to all the Arab countries, and also Egypt's high level of banking and insurance companies and technological level of trade is very important. That is why it has been a leader for African countries to come and invest in Egypt and also in the Gulf countries. It helps the Gulf countries to come and invest in Egypt and in Africa also. And Egypt could be the catalyst or the mediator between the investments that are coming from the Gulf.
Yes.
And also using the resources that are in Egypt and in other African countries. As you know, Africa has a lot and of many natural resources that have not been invested, and they need a good kind of partnership between investments, and Egypt could be like the hub that could receive the investments and also could reconstruct companies that are able to invest in the natural resources and make them products that are able to be able to be traded in the global market.
Yes, indeed. Madam Ambassador, what fields are you witnessing a significant intra-regional trade in between the two sides?
We have seen the pandemic, the COVID, and how much it affected all of the African countries. That is why Egypt has formed the Council for medical equipment, and this council is helping to invest in pharmaceuticals and in medical products and to export them to African countries, because of course Egypt has the capability of also producing the vaccine, and we have seen how much African countries suffered because they don't have enough vaccine for all the population. So the Council for Investment in Medical and Pharmaceutical is one of the good, the strategic also long-term investment in Africa. Mm-hmm. Also, if we invest in the infrastructure, it will help a lot for the trading of goods. Like, for instance, we are now constructing roads and bridges between African countries, for instance, between Egypt, Sudan, Kenya, and along all the African continent until Cape Town. So these roads and bridges, and of course the maritime ports will be good for enhancing and for improving the business investment in trade and in exchange of goods, and also in exporting goods from Africa, because only 3% is the total exports and imports between African countries, which is a very low percentage. If there are bridges and roads, it will make life easy for the exporters and exporting goods.
Absolutely. Right. Madam Ambassador, today we've seen the Prime Minister, Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, speaking about the need to boost trade and economic cooperation with Arab and African partners. And he also said that he appreciates cooperation with many international institutions, for example, the International Islamic Institution for Trade Finances, amongst others. What role do these institutions have in furthering trade between Arab and African countries?
The boosting of trade is not only bilateral, but it's also multilateral. And the EU, for instance, partnership with Africa is very important. The OIC partnership with Africa is very important, because there are agencies and there are centers of exchange of goods and of investment, and the Council for Businessmen in OIC countries are very important to trade with Africa. Mm-hmm. So we should, like Prime Minister Madbouli mentioned, we should encourage these partnerships, and we should renew the partnerships that are built on mutual interest. And it will give stability and security for the African countries, and also it will create jobs, and it will boost the level of economic progress, social development, economic development. If we allow the businessmen to network and to meet on the on the level of the two organizations that we are speaking about, the African Union and the OIC. It will have a long-term effect on Asian, African countries and also on European countries.
Absolutely. Madam Ambassador, you also mentioned the role of, business persons, etc. So there is a part for the private sector as well to play in furthering this trade relationship.
Of course, Egypt is one of the countries that boost the facilities. The private sector will not engage except with a lot of facilities and government support. So Egypt is asking for also countries, governments in Africa to also to support the private sector in order to help the governments in their projects. In order to, there are a lot of challenges and common challenges for the government and for the private sector. So it is better if both put hand in hand and in order to achieve sustainable development and prosperity for the people in Africa.
Absolutely. Madam Ambassador, one final question. I know I've taken up much of your time. What are some of the challenges that you see facing this possibility of furthering trade between Arab and African countries, and how, in your opinion, can they be overcome efficiently?
Well, there are two challenges that are facing the world. I think one of them we have talked about because of the International Women's Day, which is the gender equality, and the second one is climate change. So these two challenges are facing the world and also facing the Arab-African relations. So it is very important to include women and youth, not only women, but women and youth in trade, in investment, in SMEs, providing financing for the small and medium enterprises. Also, it is important to face the challenges of climate, because climate change is going to affect all of us, and especially poor people and women and children in Africa. So
yes.
It is very important that the government and the private sector put hand in hand to face these two challenges, especially that Egypt is hosting COP27 this year. So there will be a lot of projects that need to be financed in order to save Africa from the problems of climate change. And we are asking all the world to finance these projects that Africa did not do anything for the climate. It is the industrialized countries who have affected Africa with this climate change. I mean, they are not responsible for the problems of the carbon and the emissions. So they have to be relieved quickly from the problems of the climate change, because of the industrialized countries have to change their methods of investment in coal and.
Absolutely right. Madam Ambassador Saad Chalabi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, I'd like to thank you very, very much, ma'am, for your time and your insight on today's edition of Africa Today. Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador. And to continue with our episode, to wrap up as well, some news making the headlines from all around the continent. A delegation from the African Development Bank is in Egypt to discuss collaboration for the success of the upcoming COP27 conference, which is to be held in Egypt in November. The delegation is Africa's premier development group financial institution. We have more details in this report.
African Development Bank Vice President Dr. Kevin Kariuki leads a delegation to Egypt, the host country for this year's United Nations Climate Change Conference 2022, for exploratory talks on how to collaborate to make COP27 a truly breakthrough event for people and planet. The COP27 is scheduled for November 2022 in the coastal city of Sharm el-Sheikh. Kariuki, the bank's vice president for power, energy, climate and green growth, will meet several officials. The visit continues until the 17th of March. Ahead of the mission, Kariuki said it was essential to start early engagement with Egypt and key stakeholders as well as partners. He said the African Development Bank will work with Egypt to build on the outcomes of COP27 and to ensure that the African COP27 is an overwhelming success. The bank's engagement with the Egyptian authorities will advance the Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh work program on global goal on adaptation with a view of securing a safe and resilient future for the planet. Also on the table will be the establishment of a platform for dialogue with African countries on developing a common position on climate change and further amplifying Africa's voice at COP27. Kariuki is meeting with representatives of the World Bank Group, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Monetary Fund, the European Investment Bank, the Islamic Development Bank, and United Nations agencies to explore a common approach for building upon the Glasgow Climate Pact. The pact comprises a package of decisions arrived at COP27, including strengthened efforts to build resilience to climate change, to curb greenhouse gas emissions through implementing just energy transition plans, and to provide the necessary finances for both. The bank delegation discusses ways to showcase initiatives for advancing green transformation, including the recently launched 2050 National Climate Change Strategy, and how these can be replicated in the developing countries, including in Africa.
And for more news, the Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development asserted the importance of cooperation between the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Water Resources and Irrigation in implementing several capacity building programs for African countries. The agency also pointed out the importance of the recently concluded program, which was organized for the first time for this regard. More details to follow.
The activities of the training program titled Sustainable Development, the Relationship Between Water, Energy and Food, that was organized by the Egyptian Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation and the South Sudanese Ministry of Water Resources concluded on Saturday. The activities of the training program titled Sustainable Development, the Relationship Between Water, Energy and Food, that was organized by the Egyptian Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation and the South Sudanese Ministry of Water Resources concluded. The Egyptian Agency of Partnership for Development asserted the importance of the cooperation between the Ministries of Foreign Affairs and Water Resources and Irrigation in implementing several capacity-building programs for African countries. It hailed the projects implemented in a number of countries in Africa, such as the Integrated Water Resources Management Project in South Sudan, the establishment of a climate change forecasting center in the DRC, and the construction of rainwater harvesting dams in Uganda. The agency also pointed out the importance of the recently concluded program, which was organized for the first time. The program tackled the negative effects of climate change on African countries and asserted the important role that Egypt plays to support the African continent in preparation for the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP27, that is scheduled to be held in Sharm el-Sheikh this November. Furthermore, it clarified the importance of cooperation between various African countries to achieve the goals of sustainable development and the 2063 African Union Development Agenda, pointing out that the agency recently signed a memorandum of understanding with the World Food Programme to establish a platform for South African cooperation.
And for our final story for the day, pessimism is hampering the vaccination drive in many countries around the African continent, the latest of which is South Africa. The details.
South Africa's fight against COVID-19 is facing the challenge of vaccine pessimism as people continue shunning the vital jabs despite their availability. Health Minister Joe Phala said many unvaccinated people refrain from getting inoculated because they feel the pandemic has been defeated. He said the vaccination program is able to administer 250,000 vaccinations a day and all measures are in place to sustain this capability, adding that there are at least 25 million doses of vaccine in the country. He also said the challenge is convincing people to vaccinate, which is more difficult now because many believe that the pandemic is over purely because the impact of the fourth Omicron wave was less severe. South Africa is the hardest hit country by the pandemic in Africa, having reported 3,694,504 COVID-19 infections with 99,725 deaths. The cases account for more than a third of the continent's reported virus infections, while the deaths represent nearly 40% of Africa's virus-related fatalities. South Africa's vaccination has largely been complemented by other containment measures, including bans on public gatherings, lockdowns, and mandatory wearing of face masks. As the country caseload continues to drop, however, these measures have been toned down. Fala noted that the country is targeting learners across institutions, as well as other youth groups to boost vaccination numbers. So far, South Africa has administered 32,548,342 doses of vaccines.
With that final story, we wrap up today's edition of Africa Today. We do hope you have enjoyed it. You were in the company of myself, Angie Meher. Many thanks for watching.